have is sex, just so we're all comfortable. Yeah. When should a couple seek outside objective help for sexual disparity or other disconnects and tension points, or should they wrestle through together up to the point of abuse or harm, etc.?
Okay, so the way that question is structured, it's kind of broken down into two parts. One facet is like, how do you know when you know that you need to get outside help? And then it's like, is the bright line abuse? Is that what? I just want to make sure.
That's what it looks like.
Okay. So here's what I will say. I actually think the exact opposite is the better benchmark, and here's what I mean. Smaller problems are easier to solve than big problems. And typically people end up in my office when they are in unimaginable, fraught stress. They are at their wits' end, they're ready to divorce, they're ready to move into the next bedroom, they are ready to nuclear option their life. Here is what I think we should do. I think we should normalize getting help really, really early. Have we talked about it 4 or 5 times and we find that we're just not getting anywhere? We're not even fighting, but it just feels like we're talking in circles. Getting help there allows the help that you get to be surgical, right? Like you're gonna bring in a hired gun that's gonna help you talk through the area that you're going in circles in. If you wait until we're at the point of desperation and abuse, not only do you need somebody to come in and help you resolve the inciting impasse, you need somebody to get in and walk you through repentance and forgiveness and restoration of trust of the abuse that got you and of the degradation of the relationship that got you to that like nuclear option point. So what I would say is, if you have been hashing and rehashing, and it's a vital issue, it's an issue that's integrated into life. I'm not talking about it's something that comes up once a year. If it's integral, and you've been talking for more than 2 months, you've had more than half a dozen conversations, and all you're doing is going in loops, bring in a neutral third. It doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist. Bring in an elder, and then if the elder is out of their depth, then bring it, right? Like least invasive interventions first, but reach for help really, really early, and you have less need of help, and there's less aggregate negative blast radius from the inciting event. Does that make sense?
My husband is very private and does not want me to talk about our sexual struggles. How do I find help? Kind of similar to what we were just talking about. Do I honor his wishes, or is this a place where I find someone to talk to anyway?
Okay, so, man, that's just a great question. Whoever put that out there, man, I'm a fan of you already. So here's what I will say. I think that when we look at scripture, it's pretty clear that both women and men have mutual responsibility one to another in the sexual aspect of the marriage. I don't think you can make any scriptural case that there isn't mutual entitlement. And I know entitlement sounds a little sticky, but I think that this is what the Bible teaches. So here is what I will say. If your partner says you can't talk to anybody, and you say, well, then you have to keep talking to me until we have reached a resolution, and they will not show up to that dialogue with you, or that dialogue is in that negative feedback loop, at that point in time, failing to resolve the issue becomes a stewardship and a sonship issue. Take it to your session. And escalate as needed.
Thank you. In the sexual integrity talk, you mentioned educating ourselves about sex and anatomy in a holy way. Where do you recommend we go to do this? What resources can we look for help?
So there is really, really, really good data out there. If you want good data, honestly, you can do great searches for scholarly data on ChatGPT. You can tailor it. You can say, I'm looking for information on the negative impacts of or on the way an XYZ functions. So that's a great way to do a search that pretty much 100% guarantees you're not going to get porn or other weird stuff. But overwhelmingly, what I would say is there's not a ton of great information out there. There just isn't, sorry. So if you have a particular thing that you need information on, there are a limited number of sexuality educators. I happen to be one of them. This isn't like the barber telling you need a haircut. Legitimately, some of these things you need to have a dialogue to make sure that you understand and you know what you know and you know what you don't. So I would say look for safe search engines. Look for folks in your midst that are contextualized by faith and subject matter experts. There are a few, I'm not the only one. So look for those. And then start asking for conversations so that the conversations come to you or to your community. But if you just want like a big old list of excellent resources, they don't really, sorry, we're early. There aren't that many.
If you are a private or a more private person who could be an internal processor who wants to encourage conversations with people, especially children, regarding positive sex conversations, do you have any recommendations?
Okay, so you're a more private person. I think we addressed that with Tammy's question during the talk proper, and so here's what I would say. If you are more private, you can talk more about historical struggles as opposed to present stuff. You can depersonalize, like it can be an issue that's yours or from your family or from your orbit, and instead of using that name or that context saying, I heard a story or I knew someone, so you can depersonalize, and that makes it feel less direct and less confronting in terms of the privacy issue. So I think discussing in ways that feel less straightforwardly disclosing is an option. I also think that with kids in particular, if you are willing to just kind of hold space, they'll get nosy with you, right? And they'll tell you where, like not all the time, but a lot of times, they'll back lead. And if you're trying to make environments where children are willing to ask, what I will say is don't encourage that by sitting down and trying to have face-to-face conversations with adolescents in particular. Give a task, give an opportunity to be in proximity where we're not looking face-to-face. I do this a lot in my work with adolescents. If I want an adolescent to open up with me, I'm like, hey, want to paint some watercolors? And I will sit next to them and we'll paint or we'll color. And so the side by side as opposed to face is a great approach for an adolescent. And if you yourself struggle with privacy and you yourself are a person that's not necessarily like gonna be straightforward verbalizing like me, that side to side approach is gonna feel more comfortable for you as well.
I like that. Go ahead.
I was just going to suggest some books that we've used for teaching kids.
The Gilkerson, I will send out a list.
Script, because that enables you to say stuff where you're like, I just don't want to say this, but I can read it. Yeah.
Oh, that is true. Also, writing down's great. Crib notes are beautiful. There's no shame in admitting I need prompts to stay on track and to remind myself of the things I want to say.
The next category is sleep, but they're pretty short questions. So I was going to call this the lightning round, and you just give
Cool.
an answer and we'll go to the next question. What about music or a story while trying to sleep?
Okay, so when we're talking about music or stories, it has to be something that is not very stimulating. So if it's Def Leppard, no. If it's Enya, maybe. If it's a spy novel, no. If it's a policy manual, maybe, right? And know yourself, know what you're super nerdy and into and is gonna be stimulating for you uniquely, and know what's gonna be like. And so really, if it's something that in general you find super disinteresting, and so like I have tinnitus, right? So my ears ring when it's quiet. So I always have audiobooks that I don't care about, because I can fall asleep to them.
I'm going to have a quick follow-up question to that. What about just headphones in your ear? You fall asleep and it keeps going for hours. Like, is there any health issues with that?
No, that is. So you're going to want to do it external to you and do it on a timer. So you don't want to be constantly stimuli while you sleep. That's not great. Or earbuds can have damage to hearing. So I would say don't do earbuds. Put on like talk radio at a low volume and then set a timer for the clock radio to go off or whatever. Figure out a way to do that low tech where you're not on your phone.
Yes. So phone is not in the bedroom.
Yeah.
How long is it reasonable to try to sleep before getting up and doing something boring?
20 minutes. Try and fall asleep for 20 minutes. If you're just not finding that sleep is coming to you, get up and do something super non-stimulating.
And this is the same question. How long should it take a person to get to sleep?
That's different for everybody. And here's the thing. If you don't have a set protocol for sleep hygiene that cues your body for that downregulation, it's going to take you longer. And so it's going to require some discipline. But start setting the routine. And the more you routinize that aspect, the more quickly you will downregulate and fall to sleep.
If you're making good steps with sleep, moving and breathing, but still having issues with stress and anxiety, what would you focus on next?
So that's a question that I have no idea how to answer because I don't know the particulars of your circumstance. So the answer is, what's the next big thing for you? If you as an organism are fundamentally healthy and intact, and I've got a self-care checklist, if you're like, no, I'm owning the checklist and I'm sleeping and I do my CrossFit or whatever, okay, if you've got all those things on lockdown and you're still like feeling overwhelmed, I don't know your story, so it'd be like, who knows your story? If you can't see it, start talking to those around you and be like, can you see? Because like I'm a little bit confused. I feel like I should be okay, but I'm not. So if you can't see it, ask those around you. They should be able to help you see it. But also, what's the next footfall for you? Is it finances? Is it time use? Is it is it repair with family? What's the thing that weighs the heaviest? And then like take that next step.
Those were all the sleep questions. And then the last category is kind of relationships and then some things that applied to things you talked about. So this one is specific to when you were talking about, you say we lie when we talk to each other. What do you mean by we lie when meeting together? In lieu of saying, I'm fine, how do we share without leaving us vulnerable to inviting unwanted advice or counsel?
Oh, well, so expectation setting is like one of my favorite things, and I do this in my counseling practice all day long. So first of all, you don't necessarily have to want to share, and it's okay not to want to share. And so that might sound like when somebody's like, how are you doing? You can be like, I'm miserable and I have no interest in talking about it with you. I mean, that's fair. But if you said that just that way, somebody would be like, oh, well, I'm sorry that's happened, but okay, we don't have to, that's fine, right? And so, right, like, so now maybe you're not the straightforward type of person, and that gets to be okay too, but you could say, I just don't want to talk about it. And if you are going to share about it, you can actually share deeply and say before you share, I'm happy to tell you what's going on, but I actually don't want any feedback. Like, I'm not in a place where I'm ready for feedback. There are various ways to just set that expectation. Like, I'm happy to tell you what's going on if you can agree that you're not going to give me advice. Well, if they've already pre-decided, then when you share, when they start talking, you can be like, remember when we started and you agreed no advice? Yeah, calling that favor in now. It's helpful. And it actually means that you can be more transparent more often if you've set the parameters for how I can do that safely with person X. Like, I'm happy to share, but I don't want feedback.
I think it's a reminder too of, as the person asking the question, a lot of times we just are like, how are you? And then we don't want something, or I have a lot of people ask me what's new in my life right now. That's a hard question because there's some things I would like to happen and aren't. And I think it's just a reminder of how are you asking people's questions? Like maybe like what'd you do this week? How was your week? Or things more immediate and personal to them right then instead of how are you?
I'd like to follow up on that. There is not a good answer to a badly structured question. And so if somebody gives you a question that they're trying to express love and interest, but it's a bad question, there's no rule that says you can't just reinvent the question in the spirit of honoring their interest, but not wanting to ask their terrible question or answer their terrible question. So if somebody's like, I'm trying to think, because I mean, I've been asked some of these questions and I'm like, what answer are you expecting out of me? If somebody comes up and is like, how are you coping with your depression? And you're like, well, that feels invasive. And you can answer by saying, well, I'm not really prepared to go into that right now, but I feel like I've done well at, or I'm learning about, like you can reframe and pivot. So I would encourage that when loving people, remember, we're gonna be bad at this. We're gonna be bad at this mutually. When people are bad at this, A, you should expect it, they're gonna be bad. And then B, be gracious and just reframe and move on rather than personalizing.
As someone who doesn't prefer touch, how do you build up to desiring it and normalizing it?
So, I mean, I don't like exercise, and I've been exercising for a long time, and sometimes you just no thank you. So I don't necessarily know that the goal is for me to feel differently than I feel about it, right? I think what you can do is have a disciplined and reasoned and thoughtful approach to it. Now, I think if you engage in the discipline over time, the insight is your hedonic response is likely to shift over time. So here is what I would say. If that is not your jam and you struggle in that area, go read some literature and really educate yourself on why this is vital, healthy, and necessary. Get yourself well informed as to why engagement here is powerful and meaningful and useful even for me. So armed with that information, you can have a conversation with yourself around the value proposition of what you're moving into. And then it becomes a principled decision you make in line with the value set. And if you consistently meet that discipline, over time, you will inevitably normalize, and you will inevitably, as you normalize, acclimate and find what and how to do that in ways that that work for you. And I will say that when we talk about like cultivating a social experience of touch, it doesn't have to be one size fits all. There are a lot of ways to do it. And the question isn't, how can everybody be like me, who's like, hi, right? Like not everybody's gonna be that, and not everybody needs to be that. Like the divergences are good. But it's like, if you are totally like, you don't even like it when you accidentally like scrape into people in the line, start small. Start with like fist bumps. Start with like kind of, little, okay, you can start slice that as thin as you need to be like, well, I can do that. And then just consistently do that. And once you're acclimated there, you can take the next footfall.
Thank you. Relationships that are hard, costly, painful, and not fun make me want to give up trying. How can I motivate myself to keep working at them? And then someone did a question similar to this, and they added, when do you stop trying?
So this is great. And honestly, uniquely in a Christian context, I think one of the best ways I motivate, because like I do this a lot, like I do a lot of sitting with a lot of distress and a lot of, and it can, like it's talked about pretty openly. Compassion fatigue is a genuine risk in the kind of profession I do. It's common among pastors and medical, like people that are people-y a lot can really struggle with this, like it's hard, it's demanding, it doesn't always feel good. And when I find myself in those moments, the way I motivate myself, and this is unique to my faith, not unique to me as a mental health professional, is I remind myself that I'm no prize to be in relationship either. I have my faults, I'm prickly, I have all kinds of sins I struggle with, and there are people that are feeling about me the exact same way I'm feeling about them. And the question you gotta ask yourself is, do you want nobody to give a crap about you because you're squirrely? And it's like, no, I want people to try, even though I do the same stupid thing over and over and over. I need people to try. I need somebody to not give up on me. I need somebody to pace run with me. And if I need it, it's not reasonable for me to give up just because you're not satisfying me. Right? So if you look at yourself and take a good hard look in the mirror at all of the ways that you are difficult, and I promise you, you're all difficult. Like, I don't even know you, but and so am I, right? Like, we are all difficult. We're all difficult together. So the insight is, do you want love? Do you want compassion? Do you want somebody to walk it out with you? Do you want somebody to give you good accountability? Do you want somebody to scaffold your growth? Man up, it's not about you. Do it anyway.
Just right along with that, 'cause that's 100% truth on that. Just asking God to give you a love for that person who's really prickly in your life. He does. He really does. Because he has far greater love for them than we'll ever have. And our love is very selfish, very proud, struggles all the time. But he gives us his love, and then it is overflowing. And it's beautiful.
I would agree. I think I'm sort of uniquely coming from like the insights of psychology. I absolutely agree. Pray about it, try and cultivate that love, but like, even if you don't have it yet, show up anyway. Show up badly. Show up in good faith that sloppy community is better than none, and just keep showing up. And as you keep showing up, it's like, look, I need somebody to show up for me. So it's really not about whether or not I want to do it. It's about, do I need this? And if I need this, is it incumbent upon me to pour back into the system that I myself stand in desperate need of?
So, and you can say no to this, but is there ever, like, I feel like there are some people, or sometimes you might have to decide, like, this is something, like, is there ever, I'm going to push a little harder, is there ever a time, like,
okay, so I'm going to reframe this question just a hair, because often people will come into my office and they will talk about so-and-so in my life is toxic. And so when somebody tells me that somebody in their life is toxic, after I throw up in my mouth a little bit and then choke that back down, here is what I reframe that into. I have horrible boundaries with that person and I'm going to blame them for it. That's what I reframe that into. There's no such thing as a toxic person. You've got bad boundaries with that person. Set better boundaries for you. Protect you. Have some dignity about you, and then have some courage and conviction of those boundaries. And like, I can give an example, and this was in my family, and I have a very, very close-knit family. And during this time, we all lived within like a 10-mile radius. And I had this aunt who had this habit of like around the large family dinner table, she would do this thing where we had all agreed to not talk about politics because there was a lot of rancor about politics. And so she would do this thing where she intentionally not talked about it. And it would be not talked about something like we're passing the mashed potatoes. And she'd be like, but creation's one of those people that believes we should just let and have no empathy. We're not going to talk about politics. And I went to my aunt privately and I said, you know, when you do that, you're talking about it, and you talk about it, you open it up, you demean me, and then you shut the dialogue down. And I feel like that's wildly unfair and it's really, really hurtful. And I went to her and I said that, and she was like, okay, and then it just persisted. And then I went to her and I instead of making a statement, this is hurtful, I drew a boundary. I was like, so Aunt Naomi, when you do that, I'm just gonna get up and leave. Wherever we are in the meal, I'm just going to quietly excuse myself. And for 5 years, typically before we got to the cheesecake, I'd be like, I'm just going to go, guys. It's been great. And one day, she was like, how come you're always leaving? Like, you haven't made it past, like, the hors d'oeuvres in 4 years. And I was like, yeah, so remember when I told you? And she asked in public, so I answered in public. Remember when I told you that if you trash me and try and change topics, I'm not gonna fight you, I'm just gonna get up and leave? Well, the reason I've been leaving before the meal's over for the last 4 years is because I leave when you do that to me. And there was like, and everybody's like, oh, that is right. She does do that. She does do that. Yeah, that's fair. And after raising that, I still ended up leaving for about another 2 years before I made it to dessert. Draw a boundary. But the thing is, when I walked out, I protected me. I had this boundary, like, you're not gonna verbally abuse me and berate my ideology strawman style, and then be like, who wants salsa? You're not gonna do that to me. That feels dehumanizing. So I had a boundary. So if you draw good boundaries, you almost never have to say 0 is the boundary. But sometimes, right, if you've got an addict that refuses to stay sober, if you've got a physically violent person that refuses to stop physically aggressing, if there are reasons to say the margin is 0, I think it's pretty thin. And I think oftentimes you're exasperated, but you probably haven't tried good boundaries. And rather than placing the onus on them, hey, you need to treat me better, saying, when you treat me this way, this is how I'm prepared to respond. And then respond that way. Because so many people come back and they're like, I've tried drawing boundaries and it didn't work. And I'm like, what do you mean it didn't work? And they're like, well, I mean, I haven't been able to sit through family dinners for 4 years. And I'm like, yeah, so how did that not work? Did you not keep your word to yourself so that you did not allow the abuse to persist? Yes, I protected me. Okay, how did the boundary not work? I'm not clear. Is that helpful? Did that answer?
No, yeah, thank you.
How do you be accountable with a spouse when you both instinctually point fingers, sometimes bringing up items not on topic, but events from years past?
Okay, so everybody's a finger pointer. It's Garden of Eden. Like, everybody's a finger, what do you mean? We instinctually, that's just like the human condition. Everybody's a finger pointer. So here's what I will say. I don't know how egregious this is, so it's hard to give a one-size-fits-all answer. If you guys have been married 35 years and it's calcified and it's mean and dirty and nasty, you probably need some professional help. If you guys are young and you're realizing patterns from family of origin early, maybe read a couple books on communication. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where that's at, but here's what I will say. Everybody's a finger pointer. And when we don't have the temperament to point fingers like this, we do it by hiding, by obviously, we do it anyway. So, depending on how well developed it is, get some resources, get some help, and try and develop new communication patterns. By the way, the fast food communication model is a great way to structure dialogue to move past and around that impulse to finger point.
And that is in your notebook if you didn't hear her speak about that.
Yeah.
When I have this is about gossip, which was helpful when I figured out when I was reading this question. When I have interpersonal conflict, I really struggle to process my feelings, figure it out if I'm wrong, and if so, what is wrong, and then figure out what to do. I usually have to talk to someone to work through things. I don't think this is gossip, but I also don't always go to the person in conflict afterwards. What are your thoughts?
Well, remember when I talked about getting counsel? If you go to a trusted counselor to do that processing, I agree that's not gossip. If you do it to an uncontextualized rando in the community, that's gossip. Park it in a place that's designed to contain that kind of exploration. Does that make sense? I'm not saying it's wrong to need to externally process. Like, I am an external processor to a stunning degree. Like, it's rough, the amount of stuff that I have to, like, say out loud to somebody else to feel like a sane human being. I say that because I'm not indifferent to that as a genuine, like, it's all swimming around in there. What I would say is have safe others that are designed to fill those functions. If you're an external processor and you got a super quiet, get buddy with the other external processors on your session, or, you know what I mean, like, find safe, trusted advisorial roles to park a lot of that process so you're not just dumping it writ large in the community, because that's super unconstructive.
Another gossip one. Gossip often becomes most of an issue with my husband, or sometimes when I'm speaking to or advising my children. How can I guard my heart about this?
That's so broad. I mean, like, you're telling me when it's happening, but I don't know why it's happening. I don't have a great answer. I need more context for that one. Like, I mean, I can say broadly speaking, the reason why people enjoy gossiping. Okay, here's the one broad tool I could give you. If you find that you, in frequent contexts, veer towards gossip, like, this is a presupposition on my part, and you can think I'm not good or I'm wrong, but here is what I would tell you. My biggest bet is the reason why you veer into gossip is because it's easier to avoid the crap you got between you, your husband, and your kids by junking somebody not in the room than it is to solve the A to B conflicts between you and your man and you and your kids. And if that's what's going on, the way you guard your heart is when you find yourself wanting to bond by junking the other guy, ask yourself the question, what hard thing in the room am I avoiding right now by trying to gossip?
How can I become more brave in relationships? I am so afraid of rocking the boat that I let things go constantly rather than confront, and dread doing something that would cause someone to confront me.
So, being willing to speak up is a cultivatable skill. Being willing to say the hard thing is a cultivatable skill. There are a couple of ways to ease into it. For example, if you struggle with confrontation, write it down and then send it in a text or an email. Or write it down and then read from your notes rather than like shooting from the hip. Create expectations. And here's what I mean. Hey, I want to give you some feedback that might be a little uncomfortable. It is taking all of the resources I have to just say the uncomfortable thing. So when I'm done, I'm not prepared to riff. I'm going to give this to you and let's just let it set for a while. And then maybe we can talk about it in a day or two. Is that okay with you? So set some clear expectations for you as the person that avoids because you're not good at conflict. You're avoiding because you fear blowback. If you set expectations in a way that creates some safety margin for you, you can ease into. The other thing is, don't start with big things, right? If you've got a really, really fraught circumstance or a really, really fraught relationship, and speaking up at all is hard for you, don't cannonball it. Don't be like, so I think our marriage is a failure. Like, that's a hard place to start. But like, maybe you could start with, you know, I've really never said anything because I felt like it was nitpicky, but when you chew with your mouth open at the table, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. I just want you to know, like, I want to throat punch you when you do it. And so you might start with something that's lower stakes. By the way, that one's not hyperbolic. I have whatever that thing is about, like, people smacking. It literally, I just want to get violent. I'm like, anything to make that noise stop. I once stopped dating a guy because he chewed with his, I heard him smack and I was like, I will never be able to be intimate with, I just like, I can't do it. Because it was just like, oh, that noise. Okay, so I have this weird thing, but what I'm saying is that one is way lower stakes than like, you know, these big ticket items. So start with something small and like learn the approach of giving the negative feedback about small things and actually practice the whole approach. If it's low stakes, it's a great time to learn the mechanics of it and be like, hey, I just had a little kind of uncomfortable thing I want to share with you, but like, I don't want it to become a whole fight. Can I share that with you? And then we can just like pause and talk about it. And then share the small thing, and you can learn the apparatus so that when it is like, hey, I think you're abusive to your mom. You've got some street cred built with you, and like you've done it, and you know the routine of it. Does that make sense?
I have written a letter and then just read the letter, and it was written to them, and that's been really helpful because I feel like I forget what I want to say because I'm confronting and it's scary. So the writing the letter has been helpful.
Piggybacking on that, the writing the letter is helpful. As a clinician and as a therapist, I hate the fact that in the social imaginary, the only time people do that is like intervention shows where it's like, if you do not go to rehab, I am, okay, yeah, I hate the fact that this is the only time in the social imaginary that we see somebody saying a hard thing and being like, I gotta use some notes. Yeah. I want to normalize that you don't have to wait until your spouse is on drugs to write it down and give them and say like, look, this is hard for me. Like, it's hard for me to say something that I don't think you're gonna enjoy hearing, and because it's hard for me, I'm gonna do everything I can to resource myself to say what I actually mean. Sorry, I just wanted to touch on that.
We have two more. They're kind of their own categories. So, and then that's the last. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for an open mic. So, what can you do with a person who lies a lot? Seems to be a habitual liar. Do I always point out the lie, confront them? I don't know if I can believe anything they say anymore.
I think that we can just cut backwards to the boundaries discussion and cross apply that. So I don't know the particulars of what they're lying about, when they're lying about, how you discover, how you know what you know about the lying. Here's what I will say. Have some boundaries with them. Like, I can't control whether or not you lie to me or you don't, but when I discover that you've lied about X, here's how I'm gonna handle that. And then do that. Boundaries are great with liars.
And this is the last one. It's a resource one. Need resources for anger management. Is there an underlying cause?
Okay, so one of the basic insights of anger is, so anger is a secondary emotion. It's not a primary emotion. And here's what I mean, like, by and large, when we look at like brand newborn babies, they don't express the emotion of anger. They have like need, right? But anger is actually a reactive emotion to not having needs met. And so in a clinical setting where I'm looking at families and people that are intimate with one another, I conceptualize anger as a wrathful response to the perceived injustice of unmet longing for relational connectedness. That's what anger is. In close intimate bonds. I mean, there's other kinds of anger, like when somebody cuts you off in traffic and you had your life flash before your eyes. You're not angry because you feel like they don't understand me. You're angry because you thought you were gonna die and like lose all future developments, right? But in a relational context, anger is the wrathful response to the perceived injustice of the withholding or absence of relational connectedness, and all of the ways that that meets needs and all of the needs that are implied in those bonds. Is that helpful? Okay.
It's helpful to me. Hopefully it was helpful to you guys too.
Well, you're the one with the mic, so
there we go. So we'll do some open mic, so just raise your hand. I will cut us off so that we'll try to be done at 3 or 2:55. We'll say thank yous and goodbyes and close in prayer, and then we'll be done. But as a reminder, there will be food set out downstairs if you need a quick meal before you head on your long journeys home. So with that, are there any questions?
So this may have been something that was touched on in the sexual integrity class. I don't know because I was downstairs. But so our oldest is on the high functioning end of the spectrum. And so there's a lot of like social, things don't catch on her social radar, if that makes sense. So there are some things that have been perceived that are like sexualized, like some behaviors at church and things that have been sexualized. So we've been trying to figure out like how to talk with her about appropriate social behavior in a way that is not basically like taking away her innocence too early. Like she just turned 6. And so I'm just wondering if there are resources or things that you can say. I know that's not a lot of information to go off of, but just like, she's our oldest, we've never had to have the talk, and there are things that unfortunately have been misunderstood by people, and I'm just not sure where to go with talking to my 6-year-old about appropriate physical boundaries And like, when do we start talking about sex with our 6-year-old? Or
You
like,
should be
not,
talking to
not
your-
with our 6-year-old. Like, when do we start doing that?
You should be
given-
talking, you should already be talking to your 6-year-old about sex in an age appropriate way. But like you absolutely should be talking to your child about their body parts. You should be giving them ways to label and identify. You should be giving them clear definitional terms. Yeah, 6 is not too early.
So I guess we are doing that. I guess I more mean like we're not talking about like the act of intercourse.
Yeah,
like,
so at 6,
what
my
kinds
kids
of
knew.
things should we be talking about
Yeah,
at
it's-
this age
yeah,
is maybe a
it's
better
not,
question.
Yeah, okay, it's not inappropriate to define terms. And here's the problem. The main reason why we're like, really, is because we're embarrassed. But if you, in a very straightforward and de-escalated way, say to a child at 6, or if they heard it on the playground, you, in a just very straightforward way, can answer those questions. Sex is a way that men and women who are, in God's design, sex is how men and women create children. It's also how they express a particular kind of affection. And this is how it's done. Like, my kids by age 6 could explain that to you. Now, not every parent is that straightforward. But by 6, my kids could tell you, sex is when a man puts his penis inside of a vagina, like full on. They just knew the terms. And I actually think them knowing that is really, really, really helpful. And in this social context, I think there is a great reason for doing that has nothing to do with their adult sexual expression. And that is, this actually happened to me. I was molested as a small child. And the fact that my mom had given me all the data, and I knew all the terms, I knew all the terminology, meant that when the cops came to query, I was like this guy with, like, I knew all the terms, and that clarity made it so, they were like, we're gonna put her on the stand, and they ended up, we didn't have to go to trial because I was so clear on all the terminology. And a lot of times when you make those things more opaque, if there is abuse, your children don't know how to label, identify, or report it. So I would say that's one half, which is more disclosure, more data, more stuff. This idea of taking away their innocence, I think, first of all, they live in the real world and they hear snippets. They're not as innocent as you think they are. Already they're not. So more education, not less. And when you're talking about appropriateness, you don't have to frame it as sexual appropriateness with your daughter. This idea of framing innocence, here's what we can do. We can just say, like, so the areas covered by a bathing suit, those areas, like, they just like have a lot of nerve endings. And so even if you don't mean anything by it, these are areas that, like, we don't tickle those areas, or we don't, right? Like, so you can have just a pretty open dialogue, and you don't necessarily have to sexualize your kid to do it.
She like kissed another toddler when she was a toddler, like on the cheek, and there was some.
I don't know that that's necessarily sexual. I don't.
No, that's what I'm saying. So this was like, sorry, I'm like going on a rabbit trail now. I didn't intend to, but like the point is like there was behavior that was perceived by some other people as they sexualized the behavior and wanted us to address it with our child, and so then we're trying to talk to her about, in general, like appropriate social behavior in interacting with peers. But there's also this like overhang of like people are like kind of assigning sexual motives to this thing.
Oh, yeah, okay, so I think you're actually conflating two separate issues. I think one of them is you, as the adult mom, are having some social baggage about the sexualization of your kid. But let's separate that, because that's not on your kid. That's your stuff to deal with, and your kid's got nothing to do with that. That's your circus, your monkeys. When we're looking at just the kid, it can be done in a very linear and straightforward way. You know what? Different families have different rules for what feels safe and good and healthy when we're expressing affection. Now, in our family, we think it's great to kiss on the cheek, but there are families that they just don't do that at all. Right? We're done.
Other questions?
I'm sorry.
So, I don't, okay, so we're supposed to have openness and be open to accountability about our problems and be open to other people sharing their problems with us so that we can have mutual accountability. But then when someone doesn't want that, we can say, when we don't want that, we can say, no, I don't want to tell you. You're asking me about my depression. I don't want to tell you. Is that because we just don't trust that individual or because we don't want that accountability? Can you help me sort that out?
So that's a beautiful question, and the answer is it definitely depends. And so let's get into the weeds a little bit. So I have a diverse range of accountability folk. But the reason why my bench is so broad and so deep is because not every person is well wired to be an accountability partner for all of my issues. And so if somebody comes up to you and is like, hey, how are you doing in this area? And you're like, I don't want to talk to you about that literally ever. There are a couple reasons why. You might feel like, I just don't trust your discretion or your discernment. And so it's not that I wouldn't talk to anybody about it, it's that I don't want to talk to you about it because it's a maturational issue or a bandwidth issue. It could be that as a personality fit, that's not a space you're well equipped to speak to. It could be that I just don't like you. Like, I mean, I do like you, but like, it could be that it's just you rub me the wrong way and I don't want, like, it's not that I wouldn't, it's that just you're not gonna be it. So it could be raw personality, it could be developmental or phase of life related, or it could be skill based. And any of those are reasons why any given individual might not be a good fit for this given issue. I need accountability for X. Now, if you find that nobody feels like a good fit at all, that's probably on you, not them, right? So ask yourself, is it an issue where you're like, okay, I would, but for these reasons, not this person or not that person, right? Then you're trying to find a good fit, and that's not always super easy. And what I will say is, and I say this again from direct personal experience, again, given the nature of the life I have and the work I do, there are particular kinds of external verbal processing conversations that I need to have. Like sometimes I have a week where I have sat with nothing but the most gray of human conditions and nothing but the most aberrant expressions of those conditions. And I need the ability to sort of just data dump. And not everybody is going to want to hear about that kind of content. And so some of my stuff, while it is in the church universal, it is not in my local body. And it's not because I don't love my local body. It's because I've looked around, I've looked to the left of me, to the right of me, to the men and the women in my midst and been like, who's the one that wants to hear about the conversations I had about polyamory all week? And I've decided that none of y'all are up for it, not because you're bad people, but because you're not in that headspace. And I don't want to make you listen to stuff that's going to be distressing to you. And I need a place to park it, so I go and I find somebody else that sits in a chair similar to mine, who also is a Christian, and periodically I'm like, hey, can I just like all this stuff onto you? And you can hold me accountable for how I'm thinking about these people, and you can, right? Like, so be open to the idea that not all your accountability needs might be met locally, and that it's okay, you get to discern, right? You get to discern. Do I trust you? Do I like your personality? Do I like your skill set? And so that discernment might mean that you have to be motivated. Did that answer the question?
It does, but then I'm still wondering, are you modeling for other people? Because they had the guts to ask you. But are you modeling an openness?
Well, so let me say this about that. You can model openness. Remember when I said there's not a good answer to a bad question? if the questions they're asking are not questions you ever are going to be interested in answering with them, you can model openness by pivoting, right? So, hey, how are you doing with your depression struggles? And you don't ever think you're going to want to share your mental health garbage with whoever that is. Then it's like, I really appreciate that you care about that. I got to tell you, I don't really want to talk about those things, but I absolutely, I'm also really struggling in, or I'm really curious about, or I was wondering if. And then what you do is, rather than shutting them down, you pivot with them to the what can I say yes to territory. Does that make sense? I agree with you. You shouldn't say no to the relationship, but you can selectively deny any individual disclosure request and then pivot to the disclosures you are willing to make. Is that helpful? Yeah, so you're not always gonna, the people that are willing to have the conversation with you might not always be the people you're willing to disclose to, and in the areas they're querying. And if that's the case, then you can pivot away from that and towards things that you're like, but here's a point where we can be mutual. So find the mutual territory rather than shutting it down. That's the openness end. But also, don't feel bad if you're like, yeah, I think you're great, but not,
You always have to say, well, I love you, but I'm not going to talk with you about that. Can you just, quiet?
No, that's inside baseball. No, that's inside baseball. You don't have to, tell them. Nobody's entitled to your mechanics. You can simply say, right? So if somebody comes up to me, and there are people that will ask questions. There are people in our midst that will be like, hey, how is your work going? And I'm like, I'm literally never going to tell you the mechanics of my work. You don't have the margin for it. I'll be like, thank you so much for asking. I feel like I'm managing that really well. And then I'll turn to something where I can have an open dialogue, right? So no, you don't have to always be like, hey, I don't think you're smart enough to talk about that. Want to talk about something else? Okay, now, if you've met me, I might be dumb enough to say that. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it has rolled up out my mouth. I think by and large, what you do is you just, right, it's easier to steer the car that's in motion. If they're demonstrating a desire to move relationally with you, then you pivot so you can stay in motion rather than being like, no, don't ever talk to me about that, right? What you just do is say, hey, thanks for your interest. Here's what's on the table for us to dialogue about, right? And move naturally into that and just keep pivoting until they're like, oh, this is the stuff you want to talk to me about. Okay, cool, we can talk about that.
Probably have time for one or two quick questions, if anyone has any more.
So how do you recover from a relationship that has been kind of marred by gossip, where if someone has spoken poorly about you and you have to build that trust back up, how do you navigate that kind of a situation?
Okay, so you're saying that you have, somebody has sinned against you by gossiping about you, and that has negatively impacted the relationship. You're asking, how do you rebuild? Well, the first question I would ask is, have you openly shared with them the offense? Have you said, this is, I am offended, I believe you have gossiped about me, and that gossip has been damaging to me? So I would say, being open with the person that has offended with you and labeling and identifying and sharing with them, written in a letter that you read to their face if you got to do it that way. Sharing the offense is the first step. And then being honest about that, as you share the offense, right? I actually, in the manual, there's steps to giving negative feedback. And so you would go through and give them those negative you could work your way through those steps and write out your letter such that you hit those steps. And then what that would do is that would give them an opportunity to understand what the offense is and how it came to be. And then I would say from there, having shared the offense, then there is a back and forth of repentance and then restoration of the relationship. I think what most often happens is that even though we talk a good game, we get offended and we go, well, I'm just going to avoid that person. Rather than going to them and saying, hey, this is the offense as I understand it. This is the impact of that offense. I wanted to share with you transparently, this is where I'm at in relationship to that offense. I wanted you to know, and then making space for a forward-moving dialogue about the offense and about the repentance process. Is that helpful?
I think so. And I guess if that goes poorly,
So
maybe
if-
work on the boundaries part of that.
So yeah, if that
And
goes
maybe
poorly,
involve your
right? Like if you
section
go and you share and you feel like the offense is persisting or they are not repentant, then you start structuring boundaries around that relationship in ways that, again, you set the margin so that you feel like you're protecting yourself. You're creating a relational structure that doesn't allow persistent offense with no consequence or or without it being identified and called out. So yeah, if there's no acknowledgement of the offense or repentance, then you construct boundaries on your side. Or in the case of the church community, I would say bring the offense to your ruling elder, and if your ruling elder is not responsive, or if your ruling elder is the offending party for that matter, then I would say bring it to the session. And if you feel like your session is so influenced either by the social currency or whatever, I would say find a neighboring church community and ask to tap their session. Or, look at bringing in an external party that feels neutral and collaborative so that you can then have the opportunity to have that grievance identified and processed. Does that give you the back end stuff?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, one more question. I think someone had their hand up. Anyone?
Going once, going twice.
Okay. Well, let's give a warm thank you to Creation for her talks and giving up her time this weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for Charles has done all the AV for us this weekend. So, Charles. And then, of course, my mom and my sister who cooked for us this weekend and made all the delicious food. If you're done with your survey, please place it, or I'll walk around with it. Place it in the bin. And then other than that, have a safe trip and get some food. Do you want to pray? Okay, she's volunteering me. Okay, I'll do it. It's okay. I can do it. Let's pray first, and then we'll collect the surveys. Dear Lord, thank you so much for the insights that we got here this weekend. I pray that we would take these into our everyday lives. It's so easy to come back from a retreat like this and be on spiritual high and have all these things we want to change and want to be better at, Lord. But I just pray that you would help us to just start small and change the things that we can, whether that's just the things we talked about at the beginning, is just finding ways to sleep better or to move more or even to breathe. So just pray that you would be with us as we try to live our lives for your glory. Help us to be better in community with each other and just coming alongside each other as relationships are hard, and they're supposed to be hard and sticky, but they're worth it, Lord. I pray that you would just help us to bring back all these things to our own churches and be an encouragement to everyone there as well. Please give all these ladies safe travels as they drive back to their homes and just give them a restful Sabbath day tomorrow. In your son's name, amen.